CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Austria becomes the first European country to return to full lockdown and make COVID vaccinations compulsory.
Our other headlines: Belarus moves thousands of migrants away from the Polish border in an apparent easing of the crisis.
Take off or losing altitude. The man who speaks for the aviation industry tells us about the course ahead after COVID.
I think we are through the worst of it, and we are seeing some positive signs. Air cargo is above where it was.
French jobless figures are worse than expected. So what does that mean for President Macron's election hopes?
And how many musicians does it take to break an orchestral record? We're in Venezuela to find out.
Austria has become the first European country to return to full lockdown and the first to announce compulsory vaccinations starting in February as coronavirus cases hit record highs.
Meanwhile, Germany's health minister says the wave of coronavirus has plunged the country into a national emergency. Jens Spahn says he is not ruling out a lockdown. German officials are warning that medical care cannot be guaranteed because hospitals are overstretched.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt. Ryan, let's start with Austria. How long is Austria's lockdown expected to last, and what else has been announced?
Hi there, Jamie. Well, the Austrian government says this new lockdown will last at a minimum 10 days, but could be extended to 3 weeks, so 20 days, if they don't see the turndown in cases that they want to get out of this. Of course, it can take a little bit of time to see the progress. If you remember that the Austrian government had initially begun this week with a lockdown that was specifically targeted for the unvaccinated portion of the population. In fact, Austria has one of the highest rates of turning down the COVID-19 vaccine in all of Europe. So they did want to remove these people from public life, telling them that not only can you not go to the restaurants or the hairdresser or these public places anymore, but you will also have to stay home going forward. This, of course, is because Austria is seeing a massive surge in new COVID-19 infections. Today, another record for the country as these numbers just tick up and up in this fourth wave. Now it looks like that Austria will be moving towards compulsory vaccinations from February, meaning that everyone who is an eligible adult will have to get the jab.
OK, that's Austria. Let's talk about Germany. Germany says it could follow with a lockdown of its own. What's the government there saying?
Well, Germany is seeing a lot of spilling over of cases and now is really in a severe phase of the pandemic. They managed to get through the summer much better than neighboring countries, notably France, which did see a bit of a peak in the summer. Germany now really seeing some of the most severe cases and the most severe numbers of all time. Really, this fourth wave has been quite nasty for Germany, continuously setting new numbers. The government is trying to make moves, especially with Chancellor Angela Merkel staying on in her caretaker capacity at the moment. The government trying to enact new measures but keep life as normal as possible. But it is truly increasingly looking like a lockdown is around the corner because of the severity of the situation. Just on Thursday, the government in the Bundestag, in the German parliament, decided to adapt new measures, which meant that in some cases, even if you are vaccinated, even if you are recovered, you will also have to present a negative test if you want to go to a bar or a restaurant. If you are in a region where the hospitals are just super saturated, those ICU beds, those critical care beds, just not available as much as they need. Other measures coming out of this decision is the fact that people who have chosen not to get vaccinated but wish to take public transportation will need to be in possession of a negative test until, in case they are presented with a spot check. The government really saying here that there is a severe situation. Take a listen to officials.
We are in a nationwide state of emergency that requires a joint national effort, that needs decisive joint state action to break that momentum. The tools to do that are there: vaccination, testing, social distancing rules, protective masks, and most importantly, contact reduction.
And the government does seem like it's trying to make some progress on the question of booster shots. Of course, Germany is one of the countries that rolled them out in early September, but it's been a real patchwork of policies. Who can get one, who can't get one, who should be getting one. The take-up as well has been quite slow for this third jab. Now it seems that they are trying to get on the same page and really push a policy forward that everyone who has gotten a second dose should be getting a third shot 6 months after the second one. Jamie.
Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt, thank you very much.
Ireland is introducing tougher COVID measures. There are new restrictions for people who've come into contact with those infected. And in a blow to the hospitality sector, pubs, nightclubs and restaurants must close by midnight. Our correspondent Michael Voss reports from Dublin.
Already cancelling Christmas parties here in Ireland as the new anti-COVID measures go into effect. Ireland, like several other European countries, is going through its fourth wave of the coronavirus pandemic. New infections and hospitalisations are reaching levels not seen since last January, so the government decided it had to tighten up with new restrictions. They're asking people to avoid social contacts and, where possible, to work from home once again. Bars, restaurants and nightclubs all now have to close at midnight. The hospitality sector isn't happy. They say it's going to hit profitability in the run-up to Christmas. And Irish newspapers are reporting that people are cancelling Christmas parties and other events. And one of the largest Santa grottos in Dublin has just laid off Santa and said it can't reopen after all, and it's refunding all the parents who'd paid to send their children there.
Well, I think it's good that they've brought restrictions back because there's a big spread of COVID, so I think we have to do what we have to do.
Are you cancelling Christmas parties?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's going to have to happen, but if people can't be in spaces and spreading the disease, then that's what we have to do.
The clubs are the things that I know my age to talk about the most, and I think that if it's closing at 12, it should almost close altogether. I think that would make a bigger difference.
COVID passports, which show that you've been fully vaccinated, are already required to go to indoor hospitality venues. That's now been extended to cinemas and theatres. There was talk that it might also be extended to hairdressers and gyms, but that hasn't happened. The other big change is that anyone in a family, in a household where someone has COVID, in the past, if you'd been fully vaccinated, you could go about life as normal. Now you have to isolate for 5 days and take 3 antigen tests, which cost about $10 each, and there is pressure on the government to make those tests free. Now, this rise in COVID comes in a country which has one of the highest vaccination rates in the world. Almost 90% of everyone over the age of 12 has been fully vaccinated. And the government's now offering third booster jabs to everyone over 50. But the government is warning that if these measures aren't enough to stop the surge in coronavirus, then further tighter restrictions could be in place before the end of the year. Michael Voss, CGTN, Dublin.
Well, the global pandemic has affected most industries, but perhaps none more so than air travel. Now that some restrictions have been lifted, people are beginning to fly again. Willie Walsh is the CEO of the International Air Transport Association. I asked him whether the industry would ever fully recover.
Well, I think it's been really bad. It's the deepest and most extended crisis the industry has ever faced. We have said that the industry lost $138 billion last year. Losses this year will be in the order of $52 billion. That's the second worst loss in history. And next year will reduce again, but still loss-making at $12 billion. But I think we are through the worst of it, and we are seeing some positive signs. Air cargo is above where it was in 2019. And most domestic markets where travel restrictions clearly don't apply have recovered to where they were in 2019. But international travel is still lagging significantly behind.
People are beginning to go back to airports, and one airport that's taking advantage of that is Heathrow, putting up its passenger charges. You talked about Heathrow Airport's greed for doing that, but isn't that just a sensible move for a business that's lost so much in the pandemic?
Well, it would be a sensible move if it was commercially driven, but what it's driven by is monopoly power. So, what Heathrow has talked about doing is increasing their charges by 90%. Now, for any business trying to recover from the depths of this pandemic, you're not going to get much recovery if you were to double your prices. If airlines were to do that, nobody would be flying. So, what we're saying is that the regulator who has responsibility for regulating, economic regulation of Heathrow, needs to carefully examine this situation, because we actually believe that Heathrow, if properly regulated, should be required to maintain charges as they are, or indeed the regulator could seek to reduce charges. So there's a lot of work to be done on this. But clearly, Heathrow trying to recover money, revenues it did not generate, because people weren't flying, is just completely unacceptable. Can you imagine any other business saying that to their customers? You weren't able to buy our product last year, so we're going to charge you extra this year because you didn't buy it last year. It's complete nonsense, and you wouldn't see it from any commercial organisation.
So we've talked about a few of the challenges facing aviation. We haven't talked about the possible challenge of global labour shortages. How's that affecting the industry?
That is a great question, because we are beginning to see some issues in certain parts of the world in relation to that, principally in the United States, where the recovery has really accelerated from other parts of the world. What they're seeing is, in some areas, it's skilled labour, like pilots and engineers, where they've had a lot of retirements. So I think it was an issue that the US was going to face in relation to that. There's been some consideration of a shortage of supply for a number of years in the US pre this pandemic. I think it's just been accentuated now by the high level of retirements that took place in 2020 and 2021. In other areas, it's the lower skilled areas that they're struggling to recruit. And I think there's a couple of factors at play there. One is where governments have provided employee support. People have found it actually more attractive not to work, because the financial support they were given was greater than they were receiving when they were working. And that's not just related to the airline industry. And in other areas, it's where people in the airline industry have seen opportunities outside of the industry. And clearly they're concerned about the uncertainty given the impact that this virus has had on aviation. So I think we will see some challenges. I'm confident that it will be addressed over time, but I think it is going to have an impact on the pace of recovery in certain markets.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the United States investigates Facebook for promoting Instagram to children despite concerns about mental health.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
This week on Razor, the Great Whale Mystery. A sustainable food of the future. And locking up plastic and carbon by putting it into our roads.
I just don't want my daughters to live in a world where there's more plastics in our oceans than fish themselves. It just shouldn't be that way.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The latest job numbers are out in France, and with an election just around the corner, those numbers are being closely watched by politicians on both sides. The new figures suggest that the French economy is performing worse than expected, with unemployment creeping up to 8.1%. It was higher than analysts had expected. They had forecast a 0.2% drop. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent in Paris, Ross Cullen. So, Ross, let's focus on those numbers first of all. Why did unemployment go up when it was expected to fall?
Well, Robin, the National Statistics Agency actually said it was a period of stability, only just creeping up 0.1%, saying that it was this quasi-stability that we are now seeing in the economy, more or less trying to stabilise and return to the kind of numbers that we did see in Q3 and Q4, so the last 6 months of the year in 2019, so pre-COVID-19 levels. That is something, now we've mentioned the pandemic, there's also being watched this fifth wave of cases washing over Europe, and if the lockdowns coming in Austria and other restrictions in the Netherlands and Belgium, if they do have an economic impact, something that they are going to be watching closely. Emmanuel Macron has spoken about the Austria lockdown and says at the moment we don't need to bring in such measures in France. We do have enough structural response in place in France already. Compulsory masks indoors, in public, in shops and banks, on trains, for example. And you have to show your health pass as well, as I did this morning, getting onto a train to prove I have been fully vaccinated. All of that in place means we don't need to bring in such restrictions at the moment, and those restrictions would obviously impact the economy as well. Something else we are seeing, in fact, is this economic rebound maybe taking place quicker and deeper than analysts expected, so much so that we are seeing, as you mentioned earlier in the programme, Robin, a labour shortage in some areas of the economy.
Ross, we are now in the run-up to the French election next year. The state of the economy will be a big issue for President Macron, won't it?
One of the biggest issues, along with security and immigration, the economy, always one of the top debate topics as we head into the campaign, really starting to hot up now with candidates joining from all sides. Emmanuel Macron has not yet said if he's going to seek re-election. It's very likely that he will declare at some point, but at the moment he's officially not in campaign mode, even though every speech he gives is being watched over closely by election analysts for any ideas of policy announcements or campaign promises. What people will be watching when it comes to March and leading up to the election in April is how the economy looks in 2022 as regards, first of all, a recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also how the economy looks in 2022 compared to earlier in Emmanuel Macron's term. So how it was performing in 2018, in 2019, before we went into this pandemic. We are heading into marking 2 years now of this health crisis across the world. So it will be important to analyse how the French economy has got to grips with and recovered from the pandemic, but also worth focusing on how it's performing generally compared to pre-pandemic times.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thanks very much indeed.
UK retail figures are up for the first time in 6 months. The total amount of goods bought by consumers rose 0.8% in October, beating the forecasts. It's largely down to Christmas shoppers who've started buying early amid fears of stock shortages caused by supply chain problems. The rise follows 5 months of no growth, ending the country's longest spending slump in 2 decades.
Ryanair has given notice that it's quitting the London Stock Exchange, becoming the first major company to blame its departure on Brexit. The airline says foreign ownership rules that have applied since the UK left the EU were behind the decision. Its final day of trading in London will be December the 17th. Ryanair says it will become solely listed on the Euronext Dublin exchange.
price of oil has fallen to under $80 a barrel amid lockdowns across Europe. Brent crude hit a four-week low of just over $78 by midday London as Germany, Austria and the Netherlands tightened their COVID regulations.
Shares in Alibaba have dropped by more than 10% in Hong Kong after the Chinese tech giant warned of a slowdown in spending. The company also forecast its annual revenue would grow at its slowest pace since its stock market debut 7 years ago. Alibaba has been on the receiving end of Beijing's regulatory crackdown on the technology industry. It was fined $2.8 billion in April in an anti-monopoly probe.
Well, let's pick that up with our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, so let's begin with Alibaba's stock tumbling.
Yeah, Jamie and Robin, and this happened yesterday for us over here in North America on the Thursday session. And the earnings came out from Baba, which trades at the New York Stock Exchange, and they were a little disappointing. But I also have to say it wasn't altogether unexpected. I think economists had been expecting them to have a fairly tough quarter, which they just did. So on Thursday, Alibaba, I was interested to hear you said they were down 10% in Hong Kong because they were down 11% here yesterday, Thursday, and they're now down 2% at about $141, almost exactly. I should just say we have a big sell-off going on here because of Austria and Ireland, just as Michael Voss and Brian Thompson were telling us. This is really rattling markets here, particularly what Austria is doing. And also the Democrats have just got their social infrastructure, the Build Back Better bill, through the House. But its passage is very uncertain still in the Senate, as I've been telling you. So Alibaba is down because much of the market is down today. But these earnings were not good. And as always, the problem with them was the forecast. You know, it doesn't really matter what you've printed as the 3 months prior have gone. It's what you say about the future. And Baba is telling us that not only did it miss its earnings and revenue in this quarter just finished that they're now reporting on, but that the rest of 2021 is going to be below Wall Street expectations. So that's the fourth quarter for everybody else, fiscal third quarter for them. And the reason is the China slowdown that appears to be going on now. We saw Singles Day, which of course is their event, back on the 11th of November, coming in softer than anybody had expected. So I think that could have been a clue, or the Singles Day, it's worth noting the Singles Day numbers are not in this latest print of their earnings. And then we have the China tech crackdown. I mean, technology is just not in favour in Beijing at the moment. And as you said in the intro, they were fined $2.8 billion. A huge amount of money by the Chinese government back in April. And then on top of all that, the investments where they put their spare cash have been a bit wobbly. And then on top of all that, they have very, very stiff competition from the likes of JD.com, Jingdong.com is what it stands for, and Pinduoduo. And of course, there's no Jack Ma there anymore. So, you know, we always link Elon Musk with the success of Tesla. And certainly over here, Alibaba's success was very strongly linked to Jack Ma, and he's not there anymore. So for all of those reasons, I think Alibaba is going to have a tough quarter or two ahead. Guys?
John, few days go by without another story about concerns around social media giants. What about states investigating Facebook promoting Instagram to children despite concerns around mental health?
Yeah, well, this is a story. We have covered this on the programme before, but the Wall Street Journal, I thought you might like to see. It's pretty much the lead story in the Journal here in New York this morning. And this is a slowly revealing problem. We're slowly getting to grips with this and understanding more about it. It tends to centre around prepubescent, pubescents and teenagers. And it tends to centre around girls, I have to say, teenage girls, because it's basically about body-shaming issues. That's the problem. So now a coalition of at least 8 attorneys general from around the country, including Massachusetts and Nebraska and Florida and New Jersey and Vermont, are getting together, and they're going to look into this issue of what Meta platforms, which we used to know as Facebook, does in terms of driving customers to their sites. Let me explain. So they're going to look into whether Meta platforms has violated any consumer protection laws and put young people at risk. And you will remember Frances Haugen, who addressed the Senate and the Westminster Parliament a couple of weeks ago. She's the whistleblower who came out of Facebook with thousands of documents. And she says that Facebook and Instagram favored driving teens to their sites over mental health and safety issues, which they knew only too well about. And in other words, what happens is a teenager, for example, might think that they're seeing pictures on Instagram of far slimmer teenagers than they are, and they worry about that. So they go to another site that might offer them dieting advice, and then these websites, these social media sites, bombard them in the weeks ahead with dieting adverts and stuff like that. That is the problem. And of course, it's an algorithm problem. That's what Frances Haugen is saying. Now, for its part, Meta Platforms, which is Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram, says that this is all a false and deep misunderstanding of the facts of the way they run their company. And they say that they're already addressing many of the issues raised by Frances Haugen and others. But it's clear, isn't it, that, and this headline on the front page of the Wall Street Journal backs this up, this is not an issue that's going away for them anytime soon. Guys?
John, we shall no doubt talk to you about it in the coming days and weeks. For the moment, thank you very much. John Terrett there, our correspondent in New York.
Now, it's the big shopping event in the United States. Black Friday in 7 days is usually the time to snap up a bargain. But this year, global supply chain problems are beginning to bite. Caroline Malone reports.
As the holiday season comes back into focus, shoppers are out searching for the best deals. With the pandemic more under control, people are able to do this year's gift buying in person. Among them is Kathleen Clinton, shopping for Thanksgiving presents for her 22 nephews and nieces.
People have been down for the last year. I call it our sabbatical year. And so we're coming out of it and we want to be jubilant and celebrate life. And so that's what we're doing.
That's music to the ears of Michelle Cosby, owner of Chocolate Mousse, a shop that sells chocolate, cards and gifts in downtown Washington, D.C. that's been around since 1978. Cosby says they're managing to stock the shelves, even though inflation means some wholesalers have increased prices. And there's been huge delays in shipments due to supply chain issues.
Orders that I placed in the summer that I still haven't received and may not ever get them, you put cancellation dates on things because if it's, too far into the season, what's the point? But some things have trickled in. I just try to get alternatives to try to find what I can to make it a full store and so that people can have choices.
Larger retailers can afford to put on early season sales to attract customers. In recent years, Black Friday deals have expanded into Black November.
Consumers are being encouraged to shop early. Retailers are offering deals early to allow for some extra time in case things are back ordered, in case they have trouble finding items, just to relieve some pressure and make sure that people have time to find the gifts they want.
The National Retail Federation says the average U.S. customer is likely to spend close to $1,000 over the holiday season on gifts and decor. Analysts predict strong consumer spending, with a more than 7% increase in sales compared to last year. Well, accounting firm Deloitte estimates that U.S. retail sales will reach up to $1.3 trillion between November and January. That means it is likely to be a holiday shopping season to celebrate for U.S. retailers, whether they're big chain or small traditional stores. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the migrant crisis on the Poland-Belarus border seems to be easing. So why the sudden resolution?
It's the first day in Germany that vaccination centers like this one are offering a third jab.
There are fears there could be a fifth wave of COVID-19 cases.
Market watchers have a keen eye on infection rates,
safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots.
France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year.
France has been a leader in vaccinating youngsters.
If a spike necessitates another lockdown,
Italy is now close to reaching its target of immunising 80% of the population over the age of 12.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Austria becomes the first European country to return to full lockdown and make COVID vaccinations compulsory.
Belarus moves thousands of migrants away from the Polish border in an apparent easing of the crisis.
And French jobless figures are worse than expected, with unemployment rising above 8%.
Poland says a small number of migrants who are still trying to cross into the EU, despite their camps being cleared by Belarus authorities. At least 2,000 migrants were moved to a warehouse after weeks at the border, camping in freezing conditions, while others were flown back to Iraq.
Meanwhile, NATO says it will offer more support to member states to try and prevent a repeat of the crisis. Let's talk now to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in Moscow. So, Stuart, this immediate crisis does seem to be over. Do we know why Belarus acted now to clear the camps?
Well, Belarus says it's clearing the camp and moving the migrants into warm accommodation because of the temperatures and risk for more ill health amongst migrants, nearly 10 of whom have already died. They're getting in that camp, in the warehouse, shelter, food, clothing, shoes, things they've been desperate for over the past week. We know that Belarus was expecting sanctions from the European Union way before the European Union announced that it would impose a fifth wave of sanctions. So it's not likely that which has changed the mind of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. What he has managed to do is catch the attention of acting Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, who has spoken with him twice now. And she has said, according to the Belarusians, that Germany is willing to take a couple of thousand migrants from Belarus if Belarus can manage to return 5,000 of them back to where they came from, various countries in the Middle East and Africa. The European Union has not made any such claim, and it would need to be a European Union decision if that were to go ahead. President Putin of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has said that it remains an internal Belarusian issue, but potentially he has put pressure on Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus by saying that he misspoke when he threatened to turn off Russian gas, which is being exported to Europe. That's not his gas to touch, and President Putin said he would pass that on to Alexander Lukashenko.
Stuart, there has, of course, been a huge diplomatic effort to bring this to an end. Both Belarus and Moscow being blamed by Iraq and the EU. So what is the response likely to be from Presidents Putin and Lukashenko?
Well, President Putin has said that because it remains an internal matter of Belarus, he's not going to get involved, but it is now dragging Russia into the conflict, with Poland, for example, shutting rail traffic from Poland to Belarus. One train line will be shut down. We know that the border crossing itself at one point for freight and vehicles is closed. It is having an effect on the Russian economy. Alexander Lukashenko insists he's not bringing migrants to Belarus, but he is very happy for them to come, and says if they're looking to get to Germany, he's not going to stop them.
And Stuart, many of the migrants going back to Erbil say they plan to return to Minsk and try again. Would Belarus be willing to allow this?
That's right. So Belarus is likely to continue letting them in. Having said that, we don't know whether the airlines who have previously been taking migrants from the Middle East to Belarus will let that happen, because they too are now under the threat of European Union sanctions if they continue to bring migrants there. And we know that the countries surrounding Belarus, Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, are all reinforcing their border fences. The British Army has been brought in to support Poland with that endeavour. Estonia building a 90-kilometre, 2.5-metre high fence. So it's only going to become more difficult for migrants to cross if they choose to do so.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you very much.
Well, migrants who have managed to cross into Poland are being supported by the humanitarian agencies. But as CGTN's Alyosha Milenkovic now reports, many are still living in fear of being sent back to Belarus.
No, tak.
Dorota Nowak spends hours on the phone every day. She is with the Salvation Foundation, a Polish NGO helping migrants who cross the border from Belarus into Poland. These are some of the people who eluded security forces and made it past the 3-kilometer exclusion zone. The Salvation Foundation is helping them get medical treatment and legal assistance so they can stay in the EU.
Czyli najczęściej, kiedy osoby są łapane przez...
Those who are caught by the authorities are mostly driven back to the border and pushed back to Belarus. People who are in a very bad health condition are usually taken too, and persons in very bad condition end up in the hospital. However, they can be taken out of the hospital and brought back to the border again or pushed back again.
It's difficult to verify the claims, as journalists are barred from entering the exclusion zone. The Polish state of emergency in that area is set to expire on December 2nd. According to the government, journalists can report from the border after that date.
We assume and we think that this crisis will last for a long time. We are prepared for a long distance fight for protect our border.
Polish authorities, together with their EU and NATO allies, are not hesitant to point fingers about who's to blame for the crisis.
The whole movement, the whole action taken by Belarusians is well prepared, well built, and we are facing a serious crisis which is a long-term plan.
Western leaders blame the migrant crisis on the Belarus government, which encouraged migrants to come to the area from the Middle East as a way to get into the EU, and also in response to Poland's support of protests in Belarus earlier this year. And while both sides trade accusations, Dorota and her colleagues will continue helping those in need. She said her motives are both humanitarian and political, adding a world without borders as her dream.
Alyosha Milenkovic reporting from Warsaw.
NATO says it's ready to support its allies on the Belarus border crisis. The Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, is on the second day of his visit to Germany. He called the alleged manipulation of vulnerable people by Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko cynical and inhumane.
Georgia's former president is to be moved from jail to a military hospital as his hunger strike enters a sixth week. Mikhail Saakashvili is reported to be suffering serious health problems and collapsed during a visit from his lawyer. Georgia's former premier was arrested after returning from exile in Ukraine to support the opposition ahead of elections.
President Xi Jinping has been talking about China's global infrastructure program, the Belt and Road Initiative. He told a symposium in Beijing that help must be given to developing countries to achieve sustainable development. He also called for better cooperation on the pandemic, cutting carbon emissions and e-commerce.
Deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon has hit a 15-year high and is up 22% in just 1 year, according to a government report. Just weeks ago, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro pledged to end illegal deforestation by 2028. He's been criticised for allowing deforestation to increase in the Amazon.
There have been fresh negotiations to try to resolve post-Brexit trade problems at the border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic met Brexit Minister David Frost in Brussels, hoping to make a breakthrough on customs paperwork and checks on goods. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Giles Gibson. Giles, any sign of progress after weeks of talks?
Well, Jamie, these latest round of talks went on for 3 hours, but still no breakthrough between the UK and the European Union. The UK's Lord Frost saying in a statement that significant gaps remain across most issues. There had been some hope that the two sides would be able to clinch a targeted, specific deal on the future supply of medicines to Northern Ireland. But Lord Frost said in his statement there has been progress, but an agreement has not been reached. We've also heard in a written statement from the EU's Maros Šefčovič saying that we need to press on and get this crucial issue across the line, referring to that issue of getting a deal done on medicines supply. The EU are also saying that Frost and Šefčovič will meet again in London next week, so really just continuing this pattern of the two top negotiators shuttling back and forth between London and Brussels each Friday, but no breakthroughs as of yet.
Giles, the insiders have been discussing this for seemingly months, if not years. What are the remaining biggest sticking points?
Well, Jamie, it feels like we've been discussing this for months as well, and the issue that is just hanging over these negotiations still is the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, and its role in overseeing disputes between the two sides. There has been this week a little bit of movement, a sense that Lord Frost from the UK is softening his approach a little bit. He gave a speech in the House of Lords in the UK Parliament this week saying that he doesn't challenge the ECJ's role as the final arbiter of EU law. He just doesn't want it involved in disputes between the UK and the EU, specifically over the Northern Ireland Protocol. In the past, he's been much stronger in his language, saying he doesn't want the ECJ involved whatsoever. And just finally, it is worth noting that the UK is keeping the option of triggering Article 16, of unilaterally suspending the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's keeping that on the table, and that would be read as a dramatic escalation by the European Commission here in Brussels.
Giles, thanks for that. Giles Gibson there, our correspondent in Brussels.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says he'll repeal controversial farming laws. The decision is a major U-turn and comes after a year of protests from farmers. Ravinder Bawa reports from Delhi.
On Friday morning, protesting farmers on the borders of Delhi were taken by surprise. Muted celebrations broke out as they breathed a sigh of relief after the Prime Minister announced a rollback of 3 farm laws.
Today I've come to tell you, the whole country, that we have decided to withdraw all 3 farm laws. We will complete the parliamentary process to repeal in the coming Parliament session later this month.
Farmers see this as a huge victory, but they say the decision has come too late.
The decision came very late. It should have come 6 months back. It would have been easier for the government as well as us.
We don't believe them, even though the Prime Minister said in front of camera, we will continue to sit here till the laws are repealed in Parliament.
Thousands of farmers have camped at Delhi's borders since last November, braving extreme weather conditions to demand the withdrawal of 3 farm laws. While the protesters say that the laws would make them pawns in the hands of private players, the government argues that the laws would make farming profitable. The farmers say this is their first step to victory, although they have a long way to go before they win the final battle. The farmers want the government to legalize the minimum support price guaranteed to them. But will the government buckle under further pressure? That still remains to be seen. Ravinder Bawa, CGTN, Delhi.
Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick look. All that and more at CGTN.com.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Quiet for months. Is former President Donald Trump planning his big comeback?
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Former US President Donald Trump has been largely absent from social media since the Capitol riots in January. He was banned from Twitter, of course, his favourite means of communication.
But now he's eyeing a return to the spotlight. Owen Fairclough reports.
1, 2, 3. It's just minutes away from the White House and perhaps the ultimate symbol of how its owner broke with modern political norms by mixing business with the presidency.
With the notable exception of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, this is the most coveted piece of real estate in Washington, D.C.
Donald Trump's luxury hotel opened less than 2 weeks before he was elected president in 2016.
But Trump is now selling this hotel amid a major fraud inquiry into his real estate empire and reports that it's in financial trouble due to dwindling revenues and mounting debts.
We will make America great again. And as he holds campaign rallies that are driving expectations he'll run for president again in 2024, Trump is expanding his business horizons. Banned from Twitter, his favoured platform, after the company blamed him for inciting the siege of Congress, Trump is launching his own. Truth Social is being developed by Trump's new media and technology group as a challenge to what he calls big tech's silencing of opposing voices. It merged with Digital World Acquisition Corporation to create a publicly traded shell company whose market value soared to just under $2 billion after the announcement in October. The shell structure format is drawing scrutiny from some finance experts, and it's not likely to stop there.
I think it's so difficult to launch a social platform. I think this sort of heavy-handed approach to managing a community and the content, despite the marketing materials being all about openness and truth, it's very much so going to be a controlled platform from everything I'm seeing.
Trump is raising capital by requesting donations via the Republican Party, as well as wealthy hedge fund investors. And Truth Social is also aiming to launch a subscription video-on-demand service, promising a mix of non-woke programming.
And as the presumptive Republican nominee with a potentially valuable ready-made audience, Trump proved time and again when president that he can upend the global news agenda with just a couple of sentences.
So how much will that help him compete with rival social networks?
Ultimately, you can get people onto the platform, but it doesn't mean they're going to stay, or they're going to stay active and they're going to engage. And that's really what's key. Most likely it's going to crash and burn.
As Trump aims to launch Truth Social in early February, Democrats are increasing the pressure on him by fighting for the release of White House communications to establish the extent of the former president's role in the deadly rampage through the Capitol. The Trump Media and Technology Group did not respond to requests for comment. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Musicians in Venezuela are hoping to set a new world record for the world's largest orchestra. Thousands of performers have gathered in the country's capital, Caracas. Mary Trini Mena reports.
They're getting ready.
the strings, the woodwinds, the brass, and percussion, rehearsing together as they try to become the world's largest orchestra. Thousands of Venezuelan musicians playing a legendary masterpiece, a symphonic poem, Tchaikovsky's March Slav. The goal to set a Guinness record.
It's a huge emotion. I feel so proud to represent my country, Venezuela.
I take great pride being here representing my country in a Guinness record attempt. That's something that doesn't happen every day.
They are determined to beat the current record set by Russia with 8,097 musicians in 2019.
These young musicians have been tuning up for the big day for 2 months now in their hometowns across Venezuela.
Most of the musicians are part of the system, a national education program that's brought musical training to hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan children since 1975.
Our mission is to form better citizens through music. In each part of Venezuela, there is talent.
Talent and determination. In order to beat the record, no one can share an instrument. The musicians must be directed by a professional, and they must be playing at the same time for at least 5 minutes.
I say that you can fight for what you want if you put your mind to it.
Organizers say they assembled 12,000 musicians, nearly 4,000 more than they needed. Now, before they celebrate, they'll need to wait for the final determination from the Guinness World Record officials to see if they hit all the right notes to break the record. Maritrin Jimena, CGTN, Caracas.
Good luck to them. With global temperatures on the rise, the pressure on scientists to deliver global solutions has never been greater.
The European Commission has launched a new series of what it calls missions to boost research and development. CGTN's Stephen Cole has been speaking to the Commission's Director General of Research and Innovation.
They were launched by the European Commission only a few weeks ago, the European mission on cancer, on soils, on oceans, on climate adaptation and on cities. These missions aim at being platforms to connect research knowledge and solutions to practical implementation, to do that in a manner which also then connects the various layers of governance, so the European layer, the national one, the local one, to then work with all interested actors, so of course primarily at the outset with scientists, but then as you deliver and try to achieve concrete objectives also with citizens, cities, local authorities. And for each of the mission, we have set a very concrete objective by 2030. And for example, 100 climate neutral cities in Europe by 2030. A super ambitious objective, but I can see more and more European cities which want to be part of that mission, use that platform to accelerate their transformation towards climate neutrality. If you want, this is inspired by the Man on the Moon mission, which I would like to call the Woman on Mars mission, where you set this very concrete objective, and then you roll out the entire toolbox of knowledge, solutions, investments, regulation at all levels with those which need these solutions in their daily life, citizens and at local level.
And you can see more of that interview on The Agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
Now, what can you make from plastic waste? Well, a team of artists in Nigeria has been building installations using recycled plastic bottles.
One piece features an angel who's on life support with an oxygen mask. The artists say they hope to draw attention to the harm that plastic is doing to our environment.
2 giant panda cubs in France have been given their official names in a celebrity baptism event.
France's World Cup winning footballer Kylian Mbappe and China's Olympic diving gold medalist Zhang Jiaqi were present as honorary godparents. Ross Cullen reports.
Two giant panda cubs being officially named, with celebrity sports stars for honorary godparents. They had French names when they were born, but have now been rebaptized. Huan Li Li, which translates to happy, and Yuan Du Du, meaning cute and chubby. The pandas were born in August at Beauval Zoo, and when they reach the age of 3 or 4, they'll go back to their homeland. Their mother, Huan Huan, arrived on loan from China in 2012. The temporary transfer of the animals has boosted the zoo's visitor numbers, from 600,000 a year before the pandas arrived to 1.4 million this year, despite the coronavirus pandemic. Kylian Mbappe, the 22-year-old soccer superstar, is going to be an honorary godfather of one of the cubs.
I was like a kid today, and you should never lose your inner child. Of course, we're here for a very special event, 100 days after the birth of our two little marvels. I have the privilege to be the godfather of one of them. It's an honor.
While 17-year-old Zhang Jiaqi, who won a diving gold for China earlier this year at the Tokyo Olympics, will be an honorary godparent to the other little bear.
The two cubs have made their first appearance in public, and this is my first visit to France, so I guess I can understand their feelings. Like me, they must be full of emotions and nerves.
Giant pandas are vulnerable to the risk of extinction, facing threats like poaching and deforestation, but the birth of cubs is a real cause for celebration, along with a naming ceremony. Ross Cullen, CGTN at Beauval Zoo in central France.
The headlines again. Austria becomes the first European country to return to full lockdown and make COVID vaccinations compulsory.
Our other headlines: Belarus moves thousands of migrants away from the Polish border in an apparent easing of the crisis.
And French jobless figures are worse than expected, with unemployment moving above 8%.
And that is it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching. We've got more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK on Freeview. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.